Before we begin the 15th chapter, Reality in Integral Knowledge, I would like to mention that the next 2 Thursdays I am involved in some seminars and meetings. So we will have our next Life Divine session on the 30th instant, not the next 2 Thursdays. We have had a good idea of ignorance, the origins, the character, and the boundaries of ignorance, the effect of ignorance, results, falsehood and evil. And now we step into a discussion of integral knowledge and reality. Integral because knowledge can be partial, knowledge can be of one piece, but an integral knowledge covers everything that is to be known and can be known. We have seen that the origin of ignorance is limitation of knowledge. The character of ignorance is separation. It is a double separation, separation from our own reality and separation from the reality of others. And the boundaries of ignorance are decided by the development of the separative consciousness. How far it has developed, to what extent it is operative, that determines the boundaries of ignorance. The task now is to return to integrality of knowledge, where there is no limitation, no separativeness, no division. Only that state is the state of an integral knowledge. And this knowledge does not have to be built by us. It is not something that is laboriously acquired and shaped by our mind. It is there already in the integral reality. It is nothing to be built but to be discovered. It is covered over, it is veiled by various levels of ignorance, and those things have to be removed so that the integral knowledge that is inherent in our being, in the reality, is unveiled. It is not only there, but also it is veiled in our own deeper and greater self. At some level, our self is one with the universal self, and also it derives from the transcendental self. So that integral knowledge is there waiting to be discovered in our own self. And it is in this sense that our self-knowledge is also a world knowledge, because myself is also the self of the world. Once I touch myself, I touch automatically the self of the world. And this self-knowledge and the world knowledge are of one piece. So both are to be recovered. We said that the knowledge of the mind, constructed by the mind, is not this true knowledge. But it does not mean on that account that it is false, it is to be discarded. It is a limited knowledge, a preparatory knowledge, which has to be corrected, which has to be subsumed in a higher knowledge. So, at its level, the mental knowledge is necessary. And this integral knowledge relates to an integral spiritual consciousness. Sri Aurobindo repeatedly uses the word integral because all spiritual consciousness is not integral, one-sided or pertinent or relevant at one level only. The absolutist, that the truth is there and nothing is here, that is not an integral knowledge. An integral spiritual consciousness is a consciousness that comprehends all that exists, all that is seen and unseen. And this integral spiritual consciousness covers knowledge of all the terms of the being, not just what we see, not just what we conceive, but all, from the highest to the lowest, along with the various gradations in between. The fault of many philosophies is that they deal with things as if there is no gradation, no stair between the material and the spiritual. Either it is that or this, but they are interrelated, each leads to the other. That aspect is lost sight of. But this integral spiritual consciousness takes into account all the grades, and starting from the superconscient, it touches the inconscience, along with the several worlds or planes of existence that relate one to the other. It covers the truth of the one, also the truth of the all, the truth of the infinite as also the finite, the truth of the eternal as also the truth of time. Now, these are oppositions to the logical mind, but to a spiritual consciousness, they exist simultaneously. It does not abolish the universe by saying that the true reality is there above, unconcerned, untouched, and all this is something alien, something lower. But the integral consciousness says experiences that the universe does not cease to be once you realize this supreme reality. In fact, the reality, the true understanding of the reality gives full meaning to this universe. Not only to this universe, but even to individual existence. A full meaning and significance is given. They are transformed into something higher from which they derive. In the process of getting their full meaning, they are also enabled to overcome separatenesses, the separativity which one individual experiences from other individuals, the separativity of each individual from the universe. Now all this separativity disappears once the integral spiritual consciousness is realized, and integral spiritual knowledge is a power relative to integral spiritual consciousness. Having said that, he takes into account why so many philosophers, why so many seers have perceived the reality in so many different ways, even in so many contradictory ways. Points out that our idea and sense of the reality vary with our own status and moment of consciousness. What I see, what I conceive, depends upon where I am and how I experience in my consciousness. Otherwise it is somebody's knowledge. So each viewpoint, each philosophy, each perception is relative to one's status and moment of one's consciousness. And this can be either an intensive understanding, intensive knowledge, necessarily excluding others. Intensive, Brahman is there, it is there and nothing else. So everything else is excluded. Or it can be inclusive and therefore comprehensive. Brahman includes everything, comprehends everything. Now it depends upon the attitude and the angle of my mind, whether I will conceive the reality in an exclusive manner or in an inclusive manner. Both are true, both are valid for the standpoint on which that knowledge is based. It is possible to affirm an ineffable absolute, that is, an absolute reality which cannot be described, which cannot be defined, which cannot be related to, which is absolutely aloof. It is possible. And when we do so, we abolish the individual being and the cosmic creation, necessarily, because only that is true. From that standpoint, even your knowledge, the highest knowledge, is only another kind of ignorance, because the absolute cannot be known. The mind fails, speech falls back. So, the highest knowledge that the human mind is capable of, they say, is only a peak of ignorance, but not real knowledge. It stops short of the absolute reality. Now this absolutism, giving validity, reality only to a relationless absolute, corresponds to a truth of thought and a truth of experience. It is not imagination. When Shankara says this, when other philosophers speak of this absolute reality, they experience it. They experience it in their thought and in their consciousness. But it is also to be noted that it is not the whole of spiritual thought and spiritual experience. It may be their particular truth and experience, but it does not negate the possibility of other type of spiritual thought and other spiritual experience. This absolutism is based on one side of the earliest Vedantic thought. Earliest means the earlier Upanishads. But even there, it does not cover the whole of that thinking. In the Upanishads, we also come across the affirmation of the absolute in transcendence, of the cosmic divinity and the divine reality in the individual. All these three experience concepts, that is, concepts not woven by the mind, but arising from experience. All these three are there. The absolute in transcendence, the cosmic divinity, and the divine reality in the individual. The Isha Upanishad, which I am sure most of you have known, speaks of the unity of all these aspects of Brahman. Transcendence, the universal aspect, the individual aspect. Now all these three are not exclusive of each other, but they are all so many aspects, facets of Brahman. The Isha Upanishad speaks of the pure and silent Brahman, but it also speaks in the next breath of the seer of everything, of the thinker, Manishi, Kavir Manishi, who sees and thinks and organizes. It is he who has gone abroad. He doesn't stay there. He who has gone Pariyagat, he who has gone abroad. And it also speaks as if to emphasize the seeming paradoxes that Brahman is far and yet near. It is immobile and always in the front. It is infinite and also finite. To emphasize that it can take and does take many statuses. And this liberating knowledge of the Upanishads excludes nothing. It makes a pointed mention that if ignorance of Brahman, ignorance of the reality is a blindness, exclusive knowledge of Brahman, leaving out the reality of the world, is a greater blindness. And the Brahman, it points out, covers both what we call a knowledge and what we call ignorance. In the Upanishadic language, knowledge is awareness of unity. Ignorance is awareness of multiplicity. But the multiplicity is based on unity, and unity plays itself, disports itself as multiplicity. So both are the same reality, both are the same Brahman, and integral knowledge is possession of both the being and the becoming. This idea, concept of Brahman the being, not being an important being, but a dynamic, capable of becoming, that is emphasized in the Isha Upanishads. And they speak, it is only when you realize both the being and the becoming that you possess immortality. And here is the foundation of the possibility of life divine. Because based as we are on our experience of multiplicity of the many of the world events, unless it is also realized as an expression, as a becoming of the being of Brahman, there is no possibility of realizing the divine life here. Divine life here can be visualized, can be hoped for only if the divine is here. If the divine is there in some incommunicable transcendence, it is illogical to conceive of and to speak of life divine on earth. So the Isha Upanishad, he points out, gives the basis for the foundation of life divine. And all affirmations and all negations are only its aspects. A negation does not mean that it is not that, it is not that. It means its freedom from affirmation. And both of them expressing itself in a particular way, but also not expressing itself in only that way. Both are possible for Brahman. So negation here is affirmation of freedom from determination. It is through these supreme affirmations and supreme negations that we arrive at the absolute, the one and the many, form and the formless, the near and the far. All these have to be realized, related to each other, and then only can we move towards the absolute. Usually, in yogic experience, what happens is, through our experience of the silent self, when we meditate, when we concentrate, when we silence the thought, and the self throws some shadow of its silence, or the Purusha is trained to be detached. You know, in the Sankhyan yoga, which is bedrock of the Vedantic yoga, and which is also the main plank of the yoga of knowledge in the Gita, and which Sri Aurobindo emphasized at a certain stage in his life. Separation of the Purusha from the Prakriti. He said, and it is true, the Sankhyan Yoga, Patanjali, all these people say that we are so much involved in day-to-day moments that we are one with it. Where are we? We have a name, we have been given a name. But when I say my mind, my stomach, my heart, I am not, it is to underline the fact that I am not the mind, I am not the heart, I am not this moment, I am not this Prakriti, my nature. So who is this mind? There is the Purusha. So, in the initial phases of any yoga, there has to be practiced a continuous sense of detachment. We do everything that is to be done, but all the while we must know that these are things to be done. These are not I. I speak, I talk, I work, but these are all done by the instrumental nature. But there should be something which observes, which watches, which does not throw itself 100% in what is being done, wholeheartedly, wholesale, but something watches. Ultimately it comes to what Mother says, step back. Step back, it is a first step. In the Indian terminology, they say, realize the Purusha, standing back from nature and observing, Sakshi, not lost in himself, not turning elsewhere, but watch. You are here, you are given an instrumental nature, you have to live, you can't run away from life. So, the nature does all these things, you have to watch. So, first step is separation of Purusha from nature, we call Prakriti. So, this has to be done at every step, and again we have to remind ourselves that I am the Purusha, I am the self, and not the stupid nature which gets upset, which identifies itself with everything, which responds, reacts to people and moments in anger, in elation, in enthusiasm. It's all part of nature. But it is the dharma of the Purusha, dharma of the soul, self, to be unmoved, to watch unperturbed. That detachment is the first step. Sri Aurobindo has given great importance to this separation of the Purusha from the Prakriti. If you see Vivekananda's works also, he says you have to separate the Purusha from the Prakriti. Only the difference is in the Gita, in the Vedanta, they stop with separating the Purusha from the Prakriti. You are a Sakshi. Sri Aurobindo takes a hint in the Gita and says, once you are separate, once you are not involved, once you have freed yourself from involvement, you are this, then you have to rise higher. You have to become the Anumanta. You have to become one who sanctions, that is, the Lord of nature. Witness of nature has to be followed up by the status of the Lord of nature. This is where he goes beyond the Vedantic Yoga, because he does not accept that nature has to be dropped. it has to be discarded. Nature, he says, is a power of God. Devatma Shakti. It is not some deformation. What is called Prakriti in the belt of ignorance, once you go beyond ignorance, it reveals itself as the Shakti. So Shakti takes on the coat of Prakriti in the belt of ignorance. But really it is a power of God. So it is not to be discarded, but it is to be controlled and instrumentally utilized by the divine will occupying a higher position. But you can't go higher unless you first separate yourself at your level. So this experience of the silent self, detached and immobile Purusha, this is the Vedantic stand. Through this experience, we move towards the absolute without features. That is the human approach to the absolute without features is through experience of the silent self, through experience of the detached, immovable Purusha. And when you get identified with the absolute without features, there is an automatic negation of the action of creative power. Only that is sensed and experienced and felt to be true. This is not true. In the process, we get rid of personal existence, universal existence, and lose ourselves only in that higher existence. Now this is one approach. This is not false, not wrong. That is why he calls it an experience concept, not a mind concept. Great people, great saints, great seers, and even today, those of us who are formed that way can, by following the yoga of the silent self and the detached Purusha, find our way towards the absolute without features, which negates, in effect, universal existence and individual existence. That is true as far as it goes, but that is not all. There is another experience, and to that we will come next time. We will resume the study on the 30th of April. But the Savitri class will go on Sunday as scheduled.